Millionaire thought he was marrying a poor maid, but he was shocked when she walked down the aisle. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The grand hall was glowing with golden chandeliers and roses imported from France. But for him, the celebration felt colder than a winter storm. Alexander Knight, the billionaire every magazine called untouchable, stood before a crowd of high society strangers, ready to marry a woman he barely knew. His jaw tightened as the choir began to sing. This was not love. This was business. His family had cornered him. If you refuse again, his uncle warned, you will risk losing everything to those waiting vultures on the board. They needed a bride at his side to soften his ruthless image. And the woman selected was supposed to be a maid, a poor girl who would not dare defy him, someone who would never stand as his equal, a perfect puppet for a contract marriage. But the moment the church doors opened, silence swept through the cathedral. She walked in, her white gown shimmering like moonlight, and every head turned in disbelief. This was not the timid servant they all imagined. Her steps were steady, her chin raised with quiet defiance. For an instant, Alexander's cold heart jolted. Whispers rippled across the pews. Who is she? She is not what they said. The scent of lilies followed her down the aisle, and with each stride, Alexander's certainty crumbled. The contract had promised him control, but her presence already felt like a challenge. Inside, his thoughts raged. She was supposed to be invisible. Why does she shine so brightly? He clenched his fists, trying to remember that this marriage was nothing more than a strategy, yet his gaze refused to leave her. As she reached the altar, their eyes locked. Hers carried storms he could not read. Secrets she refused to reveal. For the first time in years, Alexander Knight, the man who commanded empires, felt unsure. The vows began, echoing like thunder through the vaulted ceiling. Do you, Alexander, take this woman? He hesitated, only for a heartbeat, but enough to make the crowd murmur. He forced the words out, his voice sharp, a shield against his trembling core. I do. When it was her turn, she spoke with a calm strength that silenced the hall. I do. No wavering, no fear. It was not submission. It was a declaration. Applause erupted, but Alexander barely heard it. His world had shifted, though no one else could see it. He had entered this arrangement to gain obedience. Instead, he had married a mystery that threatened to undo him. As the reception began, he caught himself watching her every move. The way she refused champagne from a politician's son. The way she held herself with dignity, as though she did not belong to him or anyone. And something inside him, buried under years of arrogance and ice, stirred awake. Tonight was meant to be his victory. Instead, it marked the beginning of a war between pride and fate. And Alexander Knight had no idea that in trying to control her, he was about to lose control of himself. The reception hall glittered with crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, and the quiet hum of a string quartet. Guests laughed politely, exchanged gossip, and raised glasses to toast the union of power and prestige. To them, this marriage was a spectacle, a transaction sealed with flowers and music. But at the center of the glittering chaos stood Alexander Knight, stiff and guarded, his eyes locked on the woman who was now legally his wife. She was supposed to be meek, a girl with no voice, someone who would fade into the background while he managed the empire. Instead, she carried herself like she belonged among them, though every glance cast her way was sharpened with suspicion. She did not cower, not even under the stares of women adorned in jewels worth more than an average family's house. She was a stranger to him, yet she unsettled him more than any rival ever had. At one point, his mother leaned close, her tone sweet but edged with steel. She does not fit, Alexander. She will embarrass you. End this quickly, he answered with silence. But the warning dug deep. It was not just his reputation at stake. His entire position on the board depended on controlling this narrative. He approached her at the edge of the ballroom, where she had chosen solitude near the tall windows. The city lights stretched endlessly behind her, 1,000 diamonds against the dark. He lowered his voice, careful to mask the storm inside him. Do you understand what this marriage is? It is a performance. We play the roles, we keep the peace, and nothing more. She turned, meeting his gaze without fear. You think I need reminding? I know exactly what this is. A contract. Nothing real. Her words were calm, but there was an undertone. Something he could not name: pride, perhaps, or a defiance born from years of being underestimated. For a brief second, his resolve wavered. He expected tears, resentment, or at least a plea for kindness. Instead, she set her glass down and said, "You may own your empire, Mr. Knight, but you do not own me." The sentence landed like a spark against dry wood. His jaw tightened. He should have been angry. He should have dismissed her. But instead, he found himself strangely intrigued. As the evening dragged on, rumors began to swirl. He caught snippets as guests passed by. She is not who they said she was. Perhaps she has secrets. Did you see the way she looked at him? That is not fear. Each word gnawed at him, feeding his uncertainty. Later that night, when the final toast had been raised and the final guest had departed, Alexander escorted her to the penthouse suite. The city glittered below, silent witnesses to their uneasy bond. The suite was vast, filled with cold marble and glass walls that offered no hiding place. He laid out the terms with precision, as though dictating a business contract. Separate rooms. Appearances in public when required. No personal entanglements. She listened, then nodded once. Fine. But remember this, I agreed to this marriage, not to surrender my dignity. Something in her voice lingered long after he turned away. In the quiet of the night, as the city pulsed beneath them, Alexander realized that the real battle had just begun. This was not the obedient arrangement he had been promised. This was a collision of wills. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Alexander Knight had no certainty about the outcome. The first weeks of their marriage unfolded like a silent duel. The penthouse was large enough to keep them apart, yet the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. Every morning, Alexander left before dawn, his suits perfectly pressed, his car waiting downstairs. Every evening, he returned to find her already settled in her own space, reading quietly or sketching in a worn notebook that she never allowed him to touch. At first, he dismissed her routines as insignificant. But the more he observed, the more unsettled he became. She cooked her own meals instead of ordering from the private chef. She refused his credit cards and instead insisted on handling simple tasks herself, buying groceries, ironing her dresses, even polishing her own shoes. These were not the actions of someone desperate to climb the ladder of wealth. They were the habits of someone who had lived through hardship and refused to surrender her independence. One evening, as rain lashed against the glass walls of the suite, Alexander returned from a brutal board meeting. He found her standing on the balcony, drenched in the storm, her arms spread as though daring the sky to break her. "You will catch pneumonia," he said sharply, pulling her inside. She turned to him, water streaming down her face, but her eyes burning. "Do you think I am fragile, Mr. Knight? I have survived worse storms than this." Her defiance stung, but it also sparked something he could not explain. He had built empires, crushed rivals, silenced critics, yet he could not silence her. She was not a wife in name only. She was a mirror reflecting every flaw he tried to bury. The next day, at a charity gala, the whispers intensified. Reporters asked invasive questions. Where did she come from? Is she truly a maid, or is there another story? Alexander noticed the way she stood tall, refusing to shrink under the scrutiny. She smiled politely, answered nothing, and carried herself with the grace of someone who belonged, even when the world insisted she did not. Later that night, in the limousine, he finally spoke. "Who are you, really?" Her answer was simple, yet it struck him deeply. "I am who I have always been. The difference is that now you are being forced to see me." He leaned back, unsettled by her words. For the first time in his life, Alexander Knight, the man who could predict markets and outmaneuver politicians, realized he could not predict his own wife. Back at the penthouse, she retreated into her room, leaving him alone in the vast living area. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring at the city skyline, but the image of her standing in the rain refused to leave his mind. It was not just her resilience. It was the loneliness he saw hidden beneath her strength. In that silence, he began to question everything. What secrets did she guard so fiercely? Why did she agree to a marriage built on lies if her pride was so unshakable? And why, despite all his rules and warnings, did he find himself drawn closer to her with every passing day? The war he thought he had already won was only beginning, and Alexander Knight was starting to realize that the woman he underestimated might be the only one capable of breaking through the fortress he had built around his heart. The turning point arrived sooner than either of them expected. One evening, Alexander invited her to accompany him to a gala hosted by one of his biggest investors. The ballroom gleamed with chandeliers and polished marble floors, filled with men in tailored suits and women in gowns that cost more than a year's salary for an ordinary worker. Alexander expected her to appear hesitant, overwhelmed, maybe even embarrassed. Instead, she walked into the room with her head high, her confidence drawing every eye in the room. The whispers began immediately. "That is not a maid. Look at her posture. She carries herself like someone born to this life." Alexander felt a strange mix of pride and irritation rising in his chest. Pride, because she made him look more powerful simply by standing beside him. Irritation, because she was not supposed to. This marriage was meant to be a shield, not a spotlight. During dinner, one of the older investors raised a glass toward her. "Mrs. Knight, you are full of surprises. Tell us, where exactly did you come from?" Alexander prepared himself for her silence, but she smiled gracefully and said, "I came from a place where money is never guaranteed, and dignity is the only thing worth protecting." The table fell silent, not knowing how to respond. She had answered without revealing anything, yet her words carried more weight than any polished speech. On the ride home, Alexander studied her in the dim light of the limousine. "You enjoy defying expectations, do you not?" he asked. She turned her face toward the window. "I do not enjoy it. I simply refuse to let others decide who I am." For the first time, Alexander found himself without a retort. He had lived his life controlling every variable, bending others to his will. Yet here she was, unbending, untamed, and increasingly impossible to ignore. The following days only deepened his confusion. He caught glimpses of her kindness when she spoke to the staff, thanking them for their efforts, remembering their names. He noticed her strength when she refused expensive gifts sent by business partners, saying, "Respect cannot be bought with jewelry." Each small act chipped away at the cold wall he had built around himself. One night, returning late from the office, he found her asleep on the couch, her sketchbook open on her lap. Curiosity overcame him. He picked it up, carefully flipping through the pages. Inside were drawings of places he recognized: street corners, parks, and even the view from their penthouse balcony. But there were also sketches of faces, some smiling, some sorrowful, capturing moments of life that no camera could ever hold. She stirred awake and caught him looking. For the first time, she seemed vulnerable. "Do not touch that," she whispered, reaching for the book. He handed it back, but not before locking eyes with her. "You are more than you let on," he said softly. Her expression hardened again, the mask slipping back into place. "And you are less untouchable than you pretend." Those words echoed in his mind long after she disappeared into her room. Alexander Knight, the man who prided himself on never being shaken, now lay awake through the night, staring at the ceiling, wondering when the battle lines between them had begun to blur. What unsettled him most was not her defiance. It was the quiet suspicion growing inside him that this marriage of convenience was no longer just a performance. Something real was forming in the shadows, something he had sworn never to let himself feel again. And that realization terrified him more than any rival ever could. The illusion of control shattered when whispers turned into headlines. A glossy magazine splashed their photographs across its front page with the caption, "Mystery Bride. Who is the woman who captured Alexander Knight?" Overnight, speculation exploded. Some claimed she was a gold digger who had tricked him. Others whispered that she carried secrets, that she was hiding a past unworthy of his empire. Alexander read the articles at his office, his jaw tight, his fist clenched around the paper. He had built his empire on discipline and image, yet here he was, trapped in a storm he could not silence. His advisors demanded answers. If she really is a maid, remove her before this destroys your credibility. His uncle hissed in his ear. You are a fool for marrying beneath you. Fix this before we all pay the price. That night, he returned to the penthouse with fire in his veins. He found her in the living room, calmly pouring tea. She looked up, unshaken by the fury burning in his eyes. Do you want to ask me directly, Alexander? She said. Or will you keep listening to strangers? The question stunned him. For a moment, he could not speak. Finally, he growled. They say you are nothing, that you are a liar who does not belong here. Her hand trembled, but only for a second. Then she placed the teapot down and met his gaze. And what do you believe? The silence between them was heavier than any thunderstorm. He wanted to say he believed her. He wanted to say none of it mattered. But the chains of pride and fear held his tongue. It does not matter what I believe. What matters is perception. And right now, perception is destroying us. Her eyes dimmed, and in that moment, something fragile broke. Then perhaps this is exactly what you wanted, a convenient excuse to push me away. Without another word, she left the room, her footsteps echoing against the marble. Alexander stood frozen, realizing too late that he had wounded her far deeper than any rumor could. Days passed in cold silence. She avoided the galas, the dinners, the charity events. She retreated into her sketches, her solitude. Alexander buried himself in work, but no victory at the office could erase the hollowness that crept into his nights. The penthouse felt larger, emptier, as though she had already vanished. One evening, he returned home to find her suitcase by the door. His chest tightened. You are leaving, he said, though it came out more like a plea than an accusation. She looked at him, her face pale but determined. I cannot stay where I am treated as a scandal instead of a person. You may have married me for convenience, but I will not live as your shame. Her words cut through him, sharp and merciless. He wanted to reach out, to stop her, but pride chained him in place. She walked past him, her heels clicking against the floor, and disappeared into the night. For the first time in years, Alexander Knight felt powerless. He had fought boardrooms and rivals, but he did not know how to fight for her. Alone in the echoing silence of the penthouse, he realized that his empire meant nothing if it cost him the only woman who had ever dared to stand against him. The war was no longer between them. It was between his pride and his heart. And if he did not choose soon, he would lose her forever. Alexander Knight did not sleep the night she left. He paced the penthouse like a man possessed, replaying every word, every look, every silence that had driven her away. For the first time in his life, he was not strategizing against a rival or calculating a merger. He was staring at the ruins of his marriage, a marriage that had started as a contract but had somehow become the only truth he wanted to protect. The next morning, the storm outside found its way into the headlines. Tabloids screamed, "Runaway bride? The night marriage crumbles." Investors called with threats, allies withdrew support, and his own family delivered their verdict with cutting precision. You see, Alexander? She was never worthy. Now you must fix the mess she created. But deep down, he knew the truth. It was not her who had broken the marriage. It was him. His pride, his silence, his inability to defend her when she needed him most. When his private investigator arrived with a file on her past, Alexander refused to open it. I do not need paper to tell me who she is, he muttered, shocking even himself. For the first time, he wanted to fight not for perception, not for power, but for justice. That evening, he walked into a press conference unannounced. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, questions flying like arrows. Where is your wife? Is it true she deceived you? Are you filing for annulment? Alexander raised a hand, his voice steady but fierce. You speak as though she is guilty. But guilty of what? Of marrying me? Of not fitting into your shallow definition of worth? Let me make this clear. The woman you doubt, the woman you slander, has shown more dignity, courage, and strength than anyone in this room. Gasps rippled through the crowd. His advisors signaled for him to stop, but Alexander continued, his voice rising. I will not allow lies to define her. If you want to attack someone, attack me, but leave my wife out of your poison. The room erupted in chaos, but for Alexander, clarity had never been sharper. He left the stage to a storm of flashing cameras, but his mind was already elsewhere, finding her, proving to her that he was not the man who had let her walk away without a fight. That night, he drove without direction, searching the city for any sign of her. The streets blurred past until he finally found himself parked outside a modest building far from the glitter of his world. Through the rain-smeared windshield, he saw a faint light in the window. Her silhouette appeared, hunched over her sketchbook, fragile yet unbroken. His chest tightened. He had nearly lost her to his arrogance. Now he had one chance left. Stepping out into the downpour, he walked toward the building, each step heavy with the weight of his choices. He did not know if she would forgive him. He did not know if he even deserved it. But he knew one truth without her. The empire he had spent a lifetime building was nothing more than an empty shell. And so, drenched in rain, Alexander Knight prepared to knock on the door, ready to fight not as a billionaire protecting his image, but as a man desperate to reclaim the only love he had ever known. Rainwater streamed down Alexander's shoulders as he stood outside the small apartment building, his heartbeat louder than the thunder above. For a man who once commanded boardrooms with a glance, lifting his hand to knock on her door felt heavier than lifting the world itself. Finally, he forced himself forward. The door opened slowly, and there she was. Her hair was loose, her eyes wary, her expression caught between shock and exhaustion. "Alexander," she breathed, his name laced with disbelief. "I came to take you home," he said, his voice hoarse. Her grip tightened on the doorframe. "Home? Do you even know what that word means? Your home was never mine. It was a gilded cage, and you let them call me a liar while you stood silent." Oh, her words struck him harder than any public humiliation. He stepped inside, uninvited but desperate. "You are right. I failed you. I thought protecting my empire meant protecting us, but all I did was protect my pride. And I cannot ask you to forgive me, but I can promise you this: I will fight for you now, not against you." She looked away, her shoulders trembling. For the first time, he saw the cracks in her armor, the pain she had carried in silence. "You think words can erase what has been done? They tore me apart in the papers. They mocked me in whispers. And you, the one man who could have stopped them, let me drown alone." Alexander took a step closer, his voice breaking. "Then let me be the one to pull you out now. Not because of a contract, not because of appearances, because I cannot breathe, knowing I let you walk away." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to let him see her surrender. "You built a kingdom, Alexander. Why risk it all for me?" He reached for her hand, not with the commanding grip of a billionaire, but with the trembling honesty of a man stripped bare. "Because without you, that kingdom is ash. Because for the first time in my life, I love someone more than I fear losing power." The silence that followed was deafening. The rain hammered the windows. The city roared outside. But in that small apartment, time seemed to stop. She searched his face for deceit and found none. At last, her defenses wavered. She let out a shuddering breath. "If you mean it, then prove it. Not to me, but to the world that tried to destroy me." Alexander nodded, resolve hardening in his chest. "I will, I swear it." For the first time, her hand stayed in his. Fragile, tentative, but real. It was not forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. And Alexander Knight knew he would give everything: his wealth, his reputation, his very name, to turn that fragile beginning into something unbreakable. Alexander kept his word. The very next morning, he arranged for a press conference that none of his advisors approved. The board begged him to reconsider. His family threatened to disown him. But Alexander stood firm. He had spent years living for power and reputation. But for the first time, he wanted to live for truth. She stood beside him, hesitant but resolute. The cameras flashed as they stepped onto the stage together. Reporters fired questions like arrows. Is it true she lied about her past? Did she marry you for money? Will you annul the marriage? Alexander raised a hand, silencing the chaos. His voice carried across the room, steady and unflinching. You want to know who my wife is? She is the woman who has stood against every whisper, every insult, every lie, and she has done so with more dignity than any of us in this room. You call her unworthy, but I say she is the only one who ever made me worthy of standing here. Gasps filled the hall, but he did not stop. Yes, Our marriage began as an arrangement. Yes, I was arrogant enough to believe I could control her. But I was wrong. She is not my possession. She is my partner. And if you think less of me for loving her, then take my fortune, take my empire, take every last piece of power I own. I will still be richer than you, because I have her. The room erupted, cameras exploding in flashes. She turned to look at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time, she saw Alexander Knight stripped of his armor, choosing her above everything he once worshipped. That night, away from the chaos, they returned to the penthouse together. She moved quietly through the familiar halls, her fingertips brushing the marble surfaces she once hated. "You really meant it," she whispered, half to herself. Alexander stepped closer, his voice low. "Every word. I cannot erase what I did to you, but I can spend the rest of my life proving that I will never fail you again." For the first time since their wedding, she smiled, faint but real. The walls she had built around her heart began to crack, not because he demanded it, but because he had finally shown her something stronger than pride, authenticity. Later, as they stood together on the balcony, the city glowing beneath them, she rested her head against his shoulder. "I never wanted your money, Alexander," she murmured. "All I ever wanted was to be seen." He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "And now the whole world will see you as I do." Oh, it was not a perfect ending. The rumors would not vanish overnight, and the battles ahead would not be easy. But in that moment, with the storm behind them and the night air wrapping them in quiet peace, they found something stronger than scandal, stronger than contracts, stronger than fear. They had found the fragile beginning of real love. And this time, neither of them would let go. Alexander kept his word. The very next morning, he arranged for a press conference that none of his advisors approved. The board begged him to reconsider. His family threatened to disown him, but Alexander stood firm. He had spent years living for power and reputation, but for the first time, he wanted to live for truth. She stood beside him, hesitant but resolute. The cameras flashed as they stepped onto the stage together. Reporters fired questions like arrows. Is it true she lied about her past? Did she marry you for money? Will you annul the marriage? Alexander raised a hand, silencing the chaos. His voice carried across the room, steady and unflinching. You want to know who my wife is? She is the woman who has stood against every whisper, every insult, every lie, and she has done so with more dignity than any of us in this room. You call her unworthy, but I say she is the only one who ever made me worthy of standing here. Ombre. Gasps filled the hall, but he did not stop. Yes, our marriage began as an arrangement. Yes, I was arrogant enough to believe I could control her. But I was wrong. She is not my possession. She is my partner. And if you think less of me for loving her, then take my fortune, take my empire, take every last piece of power I own. I will still be richer than you, because I have her. The room erupted, cameras exploding in flashes. She turned to look at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time, she saw Alexander Knight stripped of his armor, choosing her above everything he once worshipped. That night, away from the chaos, they returned to the penthouse together. She moved quietly through the familiar halls, her fingertips brushing the marble surfaces she once hated. You really meant it, she whispered, half to herself. Alexander stepped closer, his voice low. Every word. I cannot erase what I did to you, but I can spend the rest of my life proving that I will never fail you again. For the first time since their wedding, she smiled, faint but real. The walls she had built around her heart began to crack, not because he demanded it, but because he had finally shown her something stronger than pride, authenticity. Later, as they stood together on the balcony, the city glowing beneath them, she rested her head against his shoulder. I never wanted your money, Alexander, she murmured. All I ever wanted was to be seen. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. And now, the whole world will see you as I do. It was not a perfect ending. The rumors would not vanish overnight, and the battles ahead would not be easy. But in that moment, with the storm behind them and the night air wrapping them in quiet peace, they found something stronger than scandal, stronger than contracts, stronger than fear. They had found the fragile beginning of real love, and this time, neither of them would let go. Months later, the world had shifted. The rumors that once threatened to crush them had faded into background noise, drowned out by the undeniable truth of how they stood together. Alexander Knight no longer appeared at events with a cold mask and a silent wife. He appeared with her hand in his, both of them walking side by side, unshaken by the stares of the powerful. At first, society tried to resist. The whispers did not die easily, but every time they appeared, she carried herself with grace, never stooping to defend herself against petty gossip. Alexander did it for her, openly and without shame, until even the harshest critics realized their cruelty had no power. The woman once branded a scandal had become a symbol of quiet strength. One spring evening, Alexander prepared something that no one expected. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of the very cathedral where their contract marriage began, guests once again filled the pews. But this time, there were no business deals, no ultimatums, no hidden bargains. This time, it was a wedding born not of convenience, but of love. She walked down the aisle again, her steps slow, her gown trailing behind her like a river of light. But unlike the first time, there was no fear, no tension. Her smile was soft, her eyes steady, and Alexander's chest ached as he watched her approach. When they reached the altar, the priest spoke words that carried a different weight now. "Do you, Alexander Knight, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and to cherish until death do you part?" This time, there was no hesitation. His voice rang out, strong and sure. "I do." "Oh, and do you take Alexander Knight to be your husband, to love and to cherish until death do you part?" Her answer was clear, her voice shimmering with certainty. "I do." The applause that followed was not polite or forced. It was real, a thunder of joy from every corner of the cathedral. The same society that once doubted them now bore witness to their truth. As they stepped outside, the evening sun bathed them in golden light. Alexander looked at her, his hand tightening around hers. "No more contracts, no more secrets, just us." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Just us." The bells rang above them, echoing across the city. For Alexander, it was not the sound of victory or power. It was the sound of freedom, the freedom to love without fear, the freedom to stand with her not as a billionaire guarding his empire, but as a man who had finally learned the meaning of devotion. Their story had begun as a lie, born of pressure and pride. But it ended here, not with a contract, but with a vow sealed by choice. The empire remained, but for Alexander Knight, the true treasure was the woman beside him. And as they walked hand in hand into the future, the crowd cheering around them, they knew one truth would forever remain. Love built on authenticity could withstand any storm.